I'm here to help you guys understand why I do what I do, both in my personal wealth as well as how I spend my time. Ultimately, to kind of jump to the end point so you guys know where I'm coming from, it is that where I see Bitcoin going is from something that people think of as a stock that trades on a screen and they look at it on CNBC to a fully functioning form of money that's both the unit of account as well as facilitating trade in direct commerce. That's gas at this gas station being denominated in Bitcoin, groceries at the grocery store being denominated in Bitcoin. Everything that you buy will be priced and ultimately bought in Bitcoin, and that too I will help people understand. So now this idea of why Bitcoin is not a hedge, because I'm not just being pedantic. Bitcoin is ultimately the permanent solution to inflation, and that is very different than something hedging inflation. And it's getting back to this idea of why it's so important. It's connecting this fundamental idea why people have heard Bitcoin is a hedge, but then while there's inflation in the market that's very observable and becoming worse, why is Bitcoin not doing the thing that I was told to do? And there's a misunderstanding there. So first I would say, has Bitcoin really been coming down when inflation has been going up? And I say, not on a long enough time horizon. And if you zoom out, Bitcoin is simply corrected, and where we're currently at in the market is at the inception of a new adoption wave where Bitcoin will go up from multiples from here. And then second, it really is not a hedge to inflation, and there is a big difference between being a hedge to inflation and a solution to inflation. And it starts from this idea, and this is where it comes down to you guys in this room, is that there's this fundamental idea that people cannot flee to the safety of something that they do not understand. So if you might be sitting in this room not understanding, well, why would Bitcoin store value over time? If boom, inflation starts to run rampant, there's not a direct connection that helps you understand Bitcoin for that reason. It's not a flight to safety for the reason that if everyone can appreciate that no more than 1% of people have an intuitive understanding of Bitcoin, how could everyone suddenly rush to Bitcoin if very few people own it? First, people have to understand Bitcoin, people have to understand why it will store value, and then, and only then, can they use it as a solution to inflation. And so even though the exact reason why, the fundamental reason to own Bitcoin is because it's the solution to inflation and because they're printing money and because there's CPI inflation, people don't necessarily connect that on the spot of it when they go to the grocery store and goods are more expensive, that, oh, if they had only bought Bitcoin or started to read a book about it, a year ago or 2 years ago, would they know how to act? So the way I think about Bitcoin adoption is Bitcoin adoption happens fundamentally as knowledge distributes. As we get together in this room, as people read books, as people listen to podcasts. So it starts with how Bitcoin works and why it's valuable. So on the fundamental reason, all value derives from the fact that there will only ever be 21 million. Bitcoin only works because it's resistant to all forms of censorship. It's also permissionless. Everybody can opt into Bitcoin. Everybody can save in Bitcoin without the permission of a financial institution or without the permission of a government. What problem does Bitcoin solve? It does solve the problem of the dollar, but also the euro, the yen, ultimately the problem of printing money. You have to accept, and this is what we'll talk about today in a bit, but that the printing of money is inevitable, and it will ultimately end very badly for all of us. So how Bitcoin works, what problem it solves, because if people don't understand that they have a problem, they oftentimes look at Bitcoin as a solution in search of a problem. It is not that. And then there's a third component of it, which is, yes, people do learn about why Bitcoin fundamentally stores value because of time in the market and because of world events. So outside the Bitcoin world and then inside the Bitcoin world. In the Bitcoin world, China banned Bitcoin mining in 2021. Bitcoin did not stop functioning. That is a data point for people. El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender in 2021. That is something, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone looks up and says, oh, this irrelevant country in Central America is now making Bitcoin legal tender, but certain people figured out that Bitcoin was something different because of that. The UAE just began mining Bitcoin in Abu Dhabi with I think it's a 500 megawatt project. Like, nation states or city states don't just magically do that if there isn't something there of substance. But really critically, each time Bitcoin rises and falls, it doesn't die. It doesn't die ever, and that may be the most important market signal to everybody as they engage in Bitcoin and learn about it. The other side of it, though, is there's the dollar side and there's the fiat side. So there's the fundamentals of why Bitcoin works and what it's there to protect against. But when the Fed printed money in 2020, $3 trillion from March of 2020 to May of 2020, $5 trillion over 2020 to 2022, that event helps people understand Bitcoin. When Russia got cut off from SWIFT, That helps people understand Bitcoin. When Canadian truckers got cut off from their bank accounts and anybody who donated to Canadian truckers, that helped people understand Bitcoin. The bank failures of earlier this year, like things are not okay when 2 of the largest 4 bank failures in America can happen virtually overnight, and that too is related to Bitcoin. The federal deficit being $2 trillion a year, also related to Bitcoin. People connect all these things, and again, it's not to say that people look at each one of them and that helps them understand Bitcoin. It's that the more time in the market, the more people figure out that what precise problem Bitcoin is solving. So this idea that just because there's inflation in the market, that doesn't help people understand Bitcoin. Bitcoin adoption happens as a function of time and knowledge distribution. This is a log price of the chart of Bitcoin, and it simply helps people understand that when they perceive that there's inflation in the market, but Bitcoin's, quote, going down, and that doesn't jive with their understanding of what Bitcoin's supposed to do, it's really rooted in their own lack of understanding of Bitcoin. What Bitcoin is really doing is simply correcting after astronomical rise. But there's a reason why it never goes down to levels that it was at in previous markets, because more time has passed and more knowledge is distributed. This is this core idea of Bitcoin not being a hedge to inflation. In my view, it's the permanent solution. So in the knowledge spectrum, you're either at the 0 state, where you don't understand why Bitcoin stores value over time, and in that world, those people that are speculating in Bitcoin, they're trading Bitcoin to get more dollars. They have no fundamental understanding. Time is not their friend. Volatility destroys people. Weak hands are inherent, and people panic at the wrong time. So at the same time when there's inflation, at the same time that Bitcoin is the solution to inflation, if you do not understand that, and Bitcoin crashes to 16,000 and you panic and sell it, did Bitcoin help you store purchasing power over time? No. So it can't be a hedge if you have inherently limited knowledge of Bitcoin. But then, if you get to the point of understanding the true fundamental signal in Bitcoin, that it's valuable because of its fixed supply, and that it's valuable because it's a form of money that can't be printed, you start to accumulate Bitcoin because it is replacing the dollar. In that world, you understand the importance of 21 million. Time is your friend. Volatility is your friend up and down. If Bitcoin goes up and you want to sell some Bitcoin to buy a house, you can, but you also don't panic and sell Bitcoin when it drops. You accumulate more. You ultimately have strong hands. You never panic. You never sell. You buy when it's low rather than selling when it's low. In that world, it's also not a hedge. So it can't be a hedge if you don't have knowledge, and it's way more than a hedge if you've started to figure out the true signal. So these are some of the fundamentals. So I'm going to go through some of the fundamentals that are happening in the world of Bitcoin. I'm going to talk about what's happening in the world of the dollar, and then I'm going to kind of get to the end state of my economic thesis to Bitcoin. So when people see that the price of Bitcoin is, quote, crashing or declining in the face of inflation, on the left side, that is the Bitcoin mining hash rate. That chart is going up and to the right. One thing that you might notice is this dip in the middle, and that's when China banned Bitcoin. But despite China banning Bitcoin, over the last 5 years, the Bitcoin mining hash rate has increased by 9 times. There's about 4 or 5 gigawatts of power right here in the state of Texas that are securing the Bitcoin network. That is a fundamental signal that says the Bitcoin network is not just more secure than it's ever been, but that the rate at which capital is being deployed to secure the Bitcoin network is increasing at a rate faster than it ever has been before. And those projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. Those are not people buying and selling Bitcoin and day trading like degenerates. On the right side of the page is the growth in the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network, for those of you who are not familiar, is a payments layer that's designed to scale Bitcoin payments. While someone might look at it and say, well, there were only 7 million transactions in August, this is a new technology that is nascent. 2 years ago, that number was in the low 100,000s. So what's happening right now from a fundamental perspective is that people are starting to use Bitcoin not just as a nascent store of value, but as a form of commerce. And you actually have to build the technology for people to use it. That technology is out of beta, and people are using it more and more every day. A 1,200% increase in the fundamental usage of small-scale transactions like $5, $10 is a signal that Bitcoin is as healthy as it's ever been. The price of Bitcoin is also stabilizing around 27K, which is 3.5 to 4 times larger than before it dipped from 8K to 4K in March of 2020. A critical stat that we all look at, people who are paying attention to the market, nearly 70% of Bitcoin has not moved in over a year. To give context that after the crash from Bitcoin to like when it first went to 19K to 3K, about 40% of Bitcoin hadn't moved in over a year. So 30% on a base of 19 million is a lot of Bitcoin in terms of nominal units of currency that have turned into long-term holders. And then importantly, the Bitcoin halving is happening in about 6 months. In my opinion, this is the most important market event that happens in Bitcoin.